Hello and welcome to the Pharma Forum podcast. I'm your host, Jonah Comstock. When President Biden talks about his cancer moonshot, he's not literally talking about the moon. He's referencing the legendary innovation push that got Americans to the moon in 1969. But what if there's a more direct link between pharmaceutical research and space science? My guests today are Christina Corridon, Global Lead of Oncology at ZS Associates, and Sandeep Sangwan, who leads the Knowledge Services R&D team at ZS Associates, or ZS for my UK colleagues. We're going to be talking about just that, how research conducted in space can advance life sciences research, especially in oncology. Welcome to the show, Christina and Sandeep.
Thank you, Jonah.
So just to start out, I would love to hear a little bit about what the two of you do at ZS Associates. And I mean, you came to me with this pitch. I thought it was so interesting. But, you know, what's the framing here? How do you guys, what are some of the ways you guys work with, I guess, space research and space science?
Well, Jonah, we don't have the pleasure of working directly with space research at this point, but some of the notable organizations that have conducted research there successfully so far on the space station are among the group of clients that we've worked with for many years that we are working with in oncology quite extensively on the R&D and commercial fronts. And so this is a really fascinating and emerging new topic area for us as we think about what's possible in terms of the future evolution of oncology research, advancements, and then also finding ways to make existing products that might be available in line and already launched better, right? Through more convenient ways to administer, faster ways to administer, et cetera. Sandeep, did you want to add a bit?
No, I think you covered it pretty much well, Christina. So from R&D perspective, we help our clients to expedite their R&D processes, be it the drug discovery part or the clinical trial part in there. So we are among the few firms that work across the R&D value chain with our clients.
So for folks who are like hearing this and thinking, what could be the connection there? What are some of the ways that it actually is helpful to pharma research to use to do work on the space station or do microgravity research? What are some of the kind of scientific underpinnings here?
Yeah, maybe I can take that, Christina. So microgravity, the new out-of-the-world prescription that pharmaceutical research has got explores many new frontiers that have transformative potential. We can talk about the main 4 frontiers spread across the pharmaceutical R&D value chain, where the microgravity experiments are helping. So the first frontier where microgravity is helping pharma is disease understanding. When we grow cells in labs on Earth, they usually flatten on the surface of culture dishes due to the gravitational pull. However, when we grow them in space, they take on more natural 3-dimensional shapes, which allow us a more in-depth study and understanding of the disease. So Neil Armstrong, a very respected name in the space pursuit of mankind, his daughter was killed by a childhood cancer named diffuse midline glioma in 1960s. Currently, a study aboard the International Space Station is exploring how the same cancer develops. We are trying to understand that cancer now. So the study will take advantage of microgravity condition to create much larger 3D structures of cancer cells than those which can be created on Earth. So these large 3D structures of cancer cells can help gain insights into the structure, composition, and interactions of these cancer cells to each other, which might provide us good new ideas for disrupting their growth and stopping their growth in there. So for Neil's one giant leap for the mankind, this would be a small yet significant step towards understanding this cancer and finding better treatments eventually. Then the second
That is so interesting. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so I was talking about the 4 frontiers where microgravity is helping. The second frontier we can talk about is drug discovery, where identification of new targets is key, right? In our bodies, we have approximately 20,000 proteins that govern our physiological functions. driving nearly every chemical process within our bodies. Understanding protein structures can help in developing new medicine again. In the unique environment of space, proteins form larger and more orderly crystals. So in both of these cases, protein crystallization is behind both these things, right? So why this happens in space and why it doesn't happen on Earth? Because of the reduced sedimentation, minimal convection currents, and reduced molecular diffusion rates, all these physical phenomena that are not in there in the space. So this allows scientists a clearer insights into the makeup. Now, again, notably, the research on KRAS protein, which is linked to several cancers, has been enhanced by space studies, offering hope for more effective cancer treatments in the future. The mutation of KRAS gene drives 30 to 40% of all cancers, including about 95% of pancreatic cancers. So we see here, if we are able to understand this single KRAS protein more accurately, it brings a lot of hope not only in pancreatic cancer, but to many more for finding effective treatments.
Then should we let Jonah weigh in?
No, I mean, I'm just fascinated. I want to hear the other two, and then I know my next question already.
Perfect.
Yeah. So continuing on the frontiers part in here, the third and one of the most important frontiers would be drug development process, that is clinical trials, right? So aging and pathogenicity have been shown to expedite in space. Hence, the knowledge gained through microgravity research can facilitate drug screening and improved drug design. We are not there yet on clinical trials in space in true sense, but leveraging the expedited aging and pathogenicity that is observed in space, we can reach the outcomes more quickly than on Earth through in vitro experimenting in there. So achieving the similar targets is faster, can be faster in space. And for clinical trials in space, would need to think beyond our traditional trial designs because of all those logistical challenges that we have in there. And then quickly touching upon the fourth frontier, and then we'll hand over back to you, Jonah. This is biomanufacturing, which is biofabrication of tissues in microgravity enables the development of tissues from pluripotent cells with high precision, right? These tissues not only provide new models to test potential new therapeutics, but they also pave the way for development of therapies for tissue and artificial organ repair and replacement. So in the long term, they can address the issue of shortage of donor organs. So in the future, we might see fantasy coming closer to reality for an industrial park, manufacturing industrial park in the space, as shown in the fantasy movies like Star Wars, Interstellar, right? So take Varda Space Industries example, right? And it's an in-space manufacturing startup, right? Their debut mission involved a mini lab in space growing crystals for HIV drug Ritonavir, right? So a lot of hope in there that we can see in the space.
It sounds like so many limitations here are going to be logistical. I mean, there is only, I imagine there's quite a bit of competition to get a research project onto the International Space Station. I'm sure that I know there's more and more kind of private space flight companies that are able to facilitate things like this, but how does that work? When you have a client that's interested in doing this work or sees a scientific benefit, how do they get a ticket?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first we must remember that it's a portion of how you would design and execute a clinical trial that can leverage the and harness the power of microgravity and what that offers, right, in terms of protein crystallization growth, and then being able to really zone in and sort of study a perfect protein that you cannot grow on Earth to the same extent, and then figure out how are we going to target that with a drug, right? So it's much more sort of early in the development process and a piece of it. So that does help in terms of thinking about how much capacity might be required or could be.
Right. You don't need 100 patients to go up there so you can do a RCT.
That's right. That's right. So it's also, I mean, I think tapping into the power of being able to do more in vitro in silico types of trials and studies and what those look like versus patient-dependent trials. But, Jonah, to me, it's also about getting a greater volume of companies interested in pursuing this and looking at this as a viable option for them to do so. So we know there's a limited subset of companies, Merck, BMS, Amgen, to name a few, that have tapped into this. But I'm not sure it's been prioritized or on the radar of a large, wide set. Or if you're an emerging pharma sort of first launch company, if you're thinking about this on the R&D horizon. So it's a different, question or piece to pursue in terms of getting a greater volume of interest. And then there's a second piece, which is how do you tap into being a company that can be prioritized and given presence and focus within the space station itself. And I know the current International Space Station is set to expire in 2030. So I think there's also a big question around what does that mean in terms of, the next generation of space stations or private sector, et cetera. What do you think, Sandeep?
Yeah, I think you made a really good point, Christina, about the expiry of International Space Station. But even before that, the challenges are not limited. So today there is only the ISS, which is start with only 7 or so astronauts running all the experiments on board at any given time, which is like nothing as compared to we have on Earth. Right. And then there is this high potential failure rate that companies usually face in these experimentation. So in late 2020, right, BMS experimented with 12 protein crystallization conditions on ISS for an undisclosed monoclonal antibody, but all of them failed to produce useful crystals. The roster, as Jonah, you mentioned, for getting a slot again on ISS is a long wait. But I'm sure companies like BMS must be thinking to try it again until they succeed.
So, okay, in the pitch, there was also mention of sort of a patient experience angle around how Merck used this work with Keytruda. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, sure. So we all know how big of a relief it brings to patient if we are able to convert an IV injection to a subcutaneous one, right? As the latter saves them from long queues and waiting time in hospitals, right? So, for example, monoclonal antibodies like the one you mentioned, Keytruda, which is used for treating several cancers, do not dissolve easy in liquid on Earth. Then the protein crystallization growth experiments that Merck was conducting. So they produced high quality crystalline suspensions that could make possible delivery of Keytruda by subcutaneous injection. Not only would make treatment more convenient for patients and caregivers, but also would significantly reduce the cost. See what we are talking about here, a space experiment for reducing cost. Sounds fun, right?
Yeah. And what's fascinating about it, I think, is this, what we hear about space and space research is that everything kind of works differently in microgravity. So the notion that experiments that you do in microgravity then can come back and help improve something on Earth, it's almost hard to get your head around. Like, the whole thing in science is you try to conduct your experiment in a setting that matches the real world setting where the drug is going to be used. But this is sort of the opposite of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess, yeah, so there's no question there. My question is, kind of how does that work? How can developing things in microgravity then and have the end result of giving you something that helps to improve in that example of the functioning of a drug or the administration of a drug here on Earth?
My take to kind of attempt to break it down in a simple fashion is that you're using a more perfect environment in terms of how the crystals grow within microgravity, or in how you're able to better study monoclonal antibodies or some of the underpinnings of what make up some of these very specialized biologic drugs like a Keytruda. And in so doing, like as mentioned previously, even if you're in market, you may learn a better way by which to sort of think about the blend of molecule solubility, in which case you can determine from there, how do we manufacture this in a different way, in which case The patient doesn't need to be getting the infusion for the same duration of time. So, you're kind of taking the same risk benefit profile of how the drug is working, but then you're using those conditions to, figure out means by which to better manufacture it to make it more convenient. And so that's the way I think about it, is sort of this, we're able to learn better in this environment where proteins grow slower. And the end result is also, much sharper, clearer, and easier for us to get better at producing what that drug will ultimately look like.
Almost like you're removing that distracting variable of gravity.
Exactly.
So thinking again, sorry, go ahead, Sandeep.
No, I was just adding up at a very high level. It's like identifying and studying the protein targets in the space, and why it becomes easier to study in space is because these proteins tend to precipitate out of the buffer solution on Earth. So they need a lot of scheduling in here. But in space, under microgravity, this problem is solved, and they stay put in the buffer solution. And based on the findings, then you come back to Earth. You have that knowledge about those target proteins, and then you identify the drug leads on Earth based on your knowledge about those proteins.
So we talked a little bit about, what the future could look like in this space. And it sounds like a lot of that is going to be dependent on what replaces the ISS and some larger trends in private and public-private space travel. But I mean, as you guys think about this, just based on the need and the potential, how do you see this playing out in the next 5, 10, 20 years in terms of the scale on which we're doing this research?
Yeah, I think from the overall industry perspective, I see it's not only the big pharma that is putting efforts in here. Even newer companies are also getting ready for putting their pets in there, and they already have, actually. So it would not be concentrated to big pharma, despite having that access challenge. InnoStudio is one example in there, right? A chemistry research company. It flew its experiment to the ISS to see where microgravity could help improve the stability of Gilead antiviral remdesivir to increase the efficiency and reduce the risk profile of the drug formulation. So it's a small company, but yet it has acquired those investments and is in the pursuits in here.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jonah, that the oncology field in particular, there is a huge appetite and a need and an urgency to experiment with how you're experimenting, right? And to do innovative things in the R&D space that are groundbreaking, that can really help alleviate, the heavy worldwide burden between morbidity, mortality, and then quality of life that cancer presents itself. So, ideally this, we remove the capacity constraints. There is, a lot more room for more companies to tap into this. It seems plausible that it could become, potentially a best practice in the early stages of development. It could also be, a key influencer in our rush to find a lot more targets and novel targets to go after in an area that has become, quite crowded and competitive, with, a lot of companies going after small targets and high unmet need areas. And so if we can find a much broader array of targets to go after, that also creates a lot more room and perhaps a healthier type of competition. And then we haven't talked a lot about people traveling into space, but we also know that, that has adverse effects on health, right? And there's a lot that we can kind of learn from, what that looks like in the health status of people while they are in space, that could also be very useful in terms of prevention, earlier detection, et cetera. So if we believe we're on the, and I would imagine many people do, that we're on the advent of space travel becoming maybe not common, but more extensive and more folks having the opportunity to do so, we can also kind of look at the impact of that on health and what the learnings might be for a broader population on Earth. that could also be quite informative and interesting.
I know NASA was doing a sort of N of 2 identical twin study with one twin was an astronaut and the other one was on Earth, just with that specific idea of kind of trying to learn what are the broader health effects and how can we quantify them more closely.
Yeah, that's a great example.
And then Sandeep, you mentioned biomanufacturing. That one seems way off in the future, just, logistically, just because you've got to get things up and down, right? You've got to get the materials up and get the biologics down again. And, lacking something like an elevator, that's like a big expense every time. But how do you imagine that working?
Yeah. So I think that has already started at a very small scale. The example we discussed earlier, right? The company has already produced those crystals and they are coming back on Earth. Initially, they faced some challenges in getting regulatory approval, getting entry with those new produced crystals out in space. But they found out a way out by getting permission to land in Australia rather than US. And in the future, they are also targeting to get into the US as well again. So this has already started. It's not that it's very much far off. Although the full-fledged manufacturing industry that we talk about, that is actually a bit far back right now.
So as we kind of come to the end of the time, is there any kind of calls to action you guys would have for folks in the industry who are maybe interested in getting more involved in this work, or maybe don't know that the possibilities for them might exist in microgravity research and space research? What sort of any kind of words of encouragement or advice?
I think the beauty of pharmaceutical research is in experimenting, and there is nothing more exciting than space from experimentation perspective. A few frontiers that we discussed about, which are already seeming accessible, but there are some frontiers where we are not there yet. For example, the clinical trials thing, we are not yet running clinical trials out in space, for which, of course, we would need to think beyond the traditional trial designs, and a lot more thinking would be required in there. But definitely some exciting frontiers to win over by pharmaceutical R&D.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think it's frontier is a perfect word for it. It's a new frontier, being open-minded and opportunistic and excited and looking for how to tap into this as another way to innovate, to speed up what you're studying to make it better, whether it's in the very very early stages of clinical development and target identification, or it's already in line and you're looking for life cycle management improvements, incremental benefits. And I think our industry is very very open and ripe for change. There's a lot of disruption, is the word, probably overly used word, that we oftentimes bring up when we talk about the healthcare landscape and where we're headed over the next 5 to 10 years, both in terms of treatments as well as how the patient experience. And so, looking forward to this being a part of that, and also, being open to a mix of different collaborations in order to, tap into space in terms of development, right? So whether that's in the private or public sectors, via NASA and the Cancer Moonshot program, with academic institutions or other private organizations or corporations that may aspire to be in space.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. I really was surprised by the degree to which this is not just hypothetical. This has been happening, and we even have products in the market that benefited from this research or were inspired by this research, and so it's just fascinating, and it'll be exciting to see where it does go as we continue to advance both in oncology research and in our abilities and access and an understanding of space travel.
Absolutely, Jonah. It's well said. I do believe this is not widely known, even from many that are working kind of actively in our industry, particularly on the commercial side. So very excited for this to become much more prevalent and the awareness to build.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much. That concludes this episode of the Pharma Forum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about other installments in the series, at pharmaforum.com/podcast. The Pharma Forum podcast is also available on iTunes, Spotify, Acast, Stitcher, and Podme, where you can find and subscribe by searching for Pharma Forum. And don't forget to visit our website, where you can sign up for daily news and analysis bulletins, and to follow us on Twitter at PharmaForum. Thanks for listening.